Right, good afternoon all, and welcome to this webinar on AEB provision supporting Kickstart. A couple of housekeeping points of order just before we launch into the actual webinar itself. If you could please make sure that you keep your microphone on mute during the webinar. If you do want to raise any questions, please do so by raising your hand, and I will endeavour to get over to you during the webinar. There will be an opportunity. Obviously, the chat function will be alive and well. So, if you want to post any questions into the chat function, please do so. Take the opportunity, and during the session, I'll try and answer the questions alongside other contributors. We'll try and answer the questions if they're specific to them. If we're unable to answer them, then I will at the end try and do a wash up. In terms of a follow-up sort of email out to everybody with any answers which were unanswered, any questions which were unanswered, shall I say, during the webinar. When you ask any questions, please do keep your questions as succinct as possible, but please do introduce who you are and where you come from. And then finally, this session is being recorded. That's just to enable us to take any notes or anything that we've missed through any of the contributors. So if you have any issues in relation to the session being recorded, then it's your opportunity to leave the webinar now. So now that we've moved through housekeeping, I move on to the actual agenda itself. So obviously we've just done welcome and introductions. I'm going to provide a very short intro for about 5 minutes, just some background and the combined authorities approach around Kickstart. Then obviously Richard Smith from DWP has kindly volunteered to be on the call today. Obviously Kickstart being a DWP initiative, Richard can bring a lot to us in terms of direction of travel and potential future hints and tips in terms of where West Midlands needs to be taking Kickstart forward to. Then back to me, I want to talk a little bit about AEB and Kickstart and the policy context and how I expect how potentially AEB can support the Kickstart programme. And then we've got two providers who are going to be talking to us about their journey. So we've got Glenn Smales from Coventry Local Authority, who's going to be talking about their approach, and also Michelle Hogg from Pathway Group, who's going to be talking about her approach. So what we're trying to do is, this is an AEB webinar, we're trying to be consistent with the AEB approach. We have both input from the Combined Authority, but also providers themselves. And obviously, Coventry and Pathway both have AEB allocations with the Combined Authority. Then I'll close this session by setting out the next steps. So, in terms of the background, I'm not going to dwell much. So moving forward into the slides. In terms of the background, I think we all know very much. We're all aware of when the Kickstart scheme started, when it's live, and its aspirations. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the background from and plus I've previously covered this at other webinars which I've hosted. But I think the key thing is about the opportunity. That it's going to provide an opportunity for young people. We know that West Midlands Combined Authority area has got the highest levels of youth unemployment in the country. So obviously it's going to help us tackle that. I think important aspects is to support businesses through the recovery process, but also to build that positive approach to employing young people. So because we've got such high levels of unemployment amongst young people, there are elements of potential stereotypes and myth busting which we could potentially achieve through Kickstart, where employers may formalise different opinions about the risk of recruiting a young person. But obviously Kickstart does provide that opportunity, which is the risk is mitigated somewhat from an employer perspective in terms of recruiting a young person into their business, given how Kickstart will operate and the wages, etc., etc. So that's the opportunity. Moving on to how COVID has hit the region, I think there's a couple of key headlines in here, and I've already alluded to young people already, but we know that BME groups have been significantly impacted by COVID, and that's continued, and no doubt Richard will probably update us a little bit later in terms of the claimants, in terms of UC claimants and the impacts of that amongst young people. But we already had issues in terms of high youth unemployment. We already had issues in terms of unemployed BAME groups of individuals, as we did have in terms of over 50s as well. COVID is discriminatory from that perspective, is that it has hit those individuals furthest away from the labour market even harder than those who were already operating within the labour market. So we need to be mindful of that. And the other side to this is that we already had very high levels of individuals in low paid work and insecure employment. So again, through COVID, a lot of those individuals have been subject to redundancy and they've moved into become unemployed. But in addition, when we move people back into work, those opportunities again may be just low paid and insecure. And we need to be mindful of that and to be thinking about in-work progression and how we can move people quickly into more sustainable employment at better rates of pay. And then finally, and this is again another big risk, and a big risk for the West Midlands, is that levels of qualification and skills within the West Midlands Combined Authority area were below that from the rest of the national averages across England, which means that from a skills economy perspective, in terms of the West Midlands being able to bounce back from COVID, it's going to be slower, and the rate of recovery will be slower than other regions because of the skills issues. So we need to tackle that, and we need to continue to keep skills at the forefront of our approach in terms of any potential sort of recovery strategy. So, and we're already at a low base. So that's why COVID has hit West Midlands hard, and it will continue to hit the West Midlands hard as we move out, hopefully, of the lockdown of lockdown post March and into the recovery as a UK recovery into that space. So finally, before I hand over to Richard, I just want to go quickly through our angle. And our angle approach is certainly for Kickstart and through DWP, the monies which potentially we can leverage through DWP into Kickstart is roughly about 120 million for the West Midlands Combined Authority area. That's a significant proportion of funding which is potentially going to be available to employers to support Kickstart and our young people. We want to ensure that we make the most of that. And part of the ways of doing that is ensuring that our messaging is consistent, that we really think about quality and progression, and that these young people, when they're recruited, that the whole wraparound support is clear in terms of what they're going to be getting, but the gateway offer is clear, that the gateways offer good quality types of provision, and also that level of progression into apprenticeships being a key element for us from a combined authority perspective. Collaboration is also key, and the ability for us to be able to collaborate with key partners, certainly from a combined authority perspective, for us to be able to collaborate with our local authority members is really key and really important, as is it will be from gateways, colleges and independent training providers, to be able to collaborate effectively both with ourselves, collaborate effectively with DWP, and also our local authority colleagues as well, alongside other key intermediaries, employer intermediaries such as the Chambers, FSB, CBI, IOD, and all those other employer-facing organisations who we can potentially collaborate with to support that clear message. And then finally, in terms of our angle, the whole element of ensuring that we've got sufficient Kickstart coverage across all the local authority areas is going to be key for us geographically. It's going to be really important to us, alongside that sector coverage, and that we've got the capacity to be able to respond. And we appreciate that many of you on the call, a number of you have already submitted gateway applications. Some of you may have been successful, others may not. Some of you may have already submitted vacancies. Some of them may have been successful applications. Some of you may have not. But for us, we've got to keep on pushing at that, sufficient coverage and capacity across the region so that we can leverage in as much funding as we can to support potentially 20,000 young people in our region. So that's setting the scene from a West Midlands Combined Authority perspective. And now I'm going to hand it over to Richard from DWP.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, everybody. David, once I've done this bit of an introduction, I'm going to turn my camera off because we've got all sorts of Teams issues in DWP today. And for a lot of our calls, we've ended up sounding like a Dalek. Some people may think that he sounds like that already, but I'll turn the camera off to hopefully get me through this presentation, if that's all right. So myself then, I'm Group Partnership Manager for the West Midlands. Obviously, that takes up Black Country, Birmingham, Solihull, and Mercia, which includes Coventry, Warwickshire, and the Marches districts within all of that. So a huge spread, huge geography there, and a lot of unemployed people to deal with through the COVID issues. I know I will have spoken to some of you about some of this previously, so I'm not going to go over old ground, but I will do a little bit of a refresher for you about Kickstart. I won't give you all the detail though, but because what I'm going to do through David after the call, I'm going to give you all the links that you need on the gov.uk site, so you won't necessarily have to trawl through everything if you want any more information, because it'll be on specific headers, and I hope you'll find that useful. The other thing I'll do as well is to make sure that as AEB providers and colleges that you really understand your counterparts within your own districts. Obviously, I'm heading this up from a West Midlands perspective. More locally, you'll probably want to deal on a day-to-day basis with my colleagues within the districts. I'm sure most of you already do that anyway, but that'll be a refresher for you. Okay, so a good deal has moved on with Kickstart, and of course, at this point in time now, we've become very operational. But let's not forget why we're doing this. And just to give you a bit of insight, and David alluded to the fact that I'll probably give you some figures anyway, so I'll give you the latest numbers around unemployment. The West Midlands group claimant count stands at just under 228,000 at the moment, and the August peak of 228,870 was the highest figure since 1993. So that just gives you an insight as to how the pandemic has hit us. And that was an increase in the West Mids of 82% since March 20. The figure's gone down slightly. We have had more people going into work, which is really good. We've had particular growth and demand sectors at the moment, but of course, what we don't know yet is the impact of furlough ending and what that might bring us in the future. In terms of youth unemployment, the West Midlands claimant count for 18 to 24-year-olds now stands at just under 46,000. And again, it peaked in August at just over 46,000. And that was the highest total since February 2012. And just to give you some district numbers there, 17,900 in Birmingham and Solihull, 13,500 in Black Country, and 14.3 thousand in Mercia. And that's an increase of 91% since March in West Midlands. I thought before I start talking about Kickstart, I thought it'd be useful perhaps for me to give you a little bit of an update in terms of that young person's journey, because young people being a focal point of what we're doing, I thought it'd be useful for you to understand what we're doing with those. So we've looked at that 18 to 24 young person's journey, hard and fast at a bespoke way of delivering services to them. The vast majority of young people who claim universal credit will now be caseloaded and be supported by a bespoke youth work coach. Further segmentation of this group has now led us to develop a further role of our youth employability coaches for young people who are far more distant from the labour market and needing a greater level of support. And that greater level of support, it's a local decision made with the young person and within an individual job centre. I suppose it's fair to say the barriers and the impact of those barriers and the young person's vulnerability are the deciding factor in the intensity of that approach. And it will differ from one person to another. But partnership work is key, and so is the delivery of support through organisations such as yours. And we recognise that that's very difficult at present with the restrictions over the past 10 months. And that's given us all a real challenge in how we engage effectively with young people and how we communicate and get things done with each other. Some of you today, I know, will have already been directly engaged with us on the work that we're doing around the development of youth hubs to add a further dimension to the help that we're giving young people. And these have been developed with a real partnership one-stop approach and are either in place already or are being developed right across the West Midlands. But again, as you can imagine, what we really want from this is the physical face-to-face engagement with young people. At present, with the current stay-at-home lockdown, again, very, very difficult to do, but the intention is there, and I'd encourage any colleges and providers on the call today to engage with my district colleagues, who, as I said, I'll provide through David after this call, and to consider how you can play your part within all of that, because that's going to be absolutely key. A huge amount of our work at the moment on those youth hubs and the partnership work that goes on with it is focused on how we can deliver what we can on a digital basis. That goes without saying, but ideally what we want to do is to pick up what we're doing physically and drop it into the digital world, and then pivot and move back as soon as we possibly can. But the setting up and formation of those youth hubs will go on, and as soon as we can, we'll start to bring that to bear when the present lockdown starts to open up. And through David, I can give you regular updates as to how those youth hubs are developing, and what the face-to-face setup is currently looking like, and how, again, you can participate in all of that. So that's a little bit about the journey. So moving on to Kickstart then. Announced in July, launched in November, and still developing, as you can imagine. But importantly, it will provide fully funded jobs for 17 to 24-year-olds who are claiming universal credit. Very briefly then, when I say fully funded, there's a salary for 25 hours a week paid at the relevant national minimum wage for a total of 6 months. Associated employer national insurance contributions, the employer minimum automatic enrolment pension contribution, and there's also an additional £1,500 per Kickstart employee will also be made available to employers for setup costs, training and support, to ensure that when this young person leaves Kickstart, they are far more employable than they were to start with. As it stands at the moment, the Kickstart placement side of this was due to end at the end of December. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment because of the present lockdown situation for two reasons. It's been difficult to get Kickstart the momentum behind it because of the tiered lockdown system, because of the present complete stay-at-home system. We haven't got perhaps the spread of vacancies that we ideally wanted at this point. So there's a lot of debate nationally about how we extend Kickstart, and any employers wishing to place vacancies. We're having lots of discussions locally at the moment with gateway providers about whether they wish to bring those vacancies to bear now or hold back until after the present lockdown starts to ease. And so for many of us in the employer and partner world in DWP, the final quarter of 2020 was full of preparation for Kickstart. And since the Chancellor's announcements in July, my district colleagues have been really busy engaging with employers who wish to provide placements for young people. But we've also been working very closely with David and the local authority and other organisations, other employer representative organisations who wish to become gateway organisations and work with those smaller employers and help them administer and deliver the programme. Because I think it's fair to say that gateways are going to be critical to the success of Kickstart in the West Midlands. With an abundance of small and medium-sized organisations, or people such as local authorities, colleges, chambers of commerce are going to be really, really important for that. Kickstart went live as a programme on the 2nd of November, and hopefully you'll have already seen vacancies in the mix. In the main, so far, those have been from larger employers who've submitted bids for 30 or more jobs over the life of Kickstart. And I know over the coming months we're going to see many more national employer household names who are bringing their vacancies forward. What we haven't seen, to be fair, is the many thousands of vacancies expected from the smaller employers linked to gateways. if I'm honest, there's been something of a logjam in the application process. My Kickstart district account managers have been working really hard with the national Kickstart team to move these through the system. It's good to say, though, that as of today, we've got somewhere in the region of 45 gateways approved, 3,500 vacancies attached to those gateways. And the expectation is that from this week and towards the end of January, we'll start to see a good number of those vacancies landing with us via the universal credit system. Of course, the lockdown announced on the 4th of January is likely to have an impact on numbers of vacancies being brought forward, but I do still expect we'll see a rapidly growing number of jobs across a range of sectors there. In terms of how we move forward then and how we work in the future, we're currently working at a model which, I'll be honest, isn't as clunky as the present one. Gateway organisations, for those of you who will have looked at it or even applied to be a gateway at the moment, are required to submit a bid where there are 30 plus vacancies, and any outside of that bid are the subject of further bids. And clearly what that doesn't give us is the flexibility we need. So there's likely to be a more flexible approach to gateway delivery in the near future, which will allow new employers to be added without necessarily the need for additional onerous applications. There will still need to be a fiscal check carried out by DWP, but the process should be far more streamlined. And I'm quite sure that some of you here today may well have made applications for gateway status and have been frustrated by the time it's taken. What I can say is that all applications made by the 9th of December were cleared by the 18th, and applications made since that date should take no more than 21 working days maximum to now reach their conclusion with the DWP national team. But I suppose what I'd really like to touch on today is how we move forward with this. And I think there's still an enormous opportunity for AEB providers and colleges to play an integral part in Kickstart. To date, the gateways we have across the West Midlands are in the main very generic. They cover a whole host of sectors, and that's great because it gives us variety in job types. And if your delivery portfolio reflects that spread, then that's great. But I'd also like you to think about particular sectors that you might specialise in within your organisations, and perhaps ones where you've got really strong employer links. So have a good think about what a potential business model might look like here, because time spent on a Kickstart placement with one of your linked employers, for argument's sake, followed by potentially an apprenticeship, could give that young person a real foot up on the ladder towards permanent employment. I think as long as there is no overlap with the programme, it's absolutely completely feasible. I suppose what I need to stress here is what's really important is that we're all able between us to collectively manage an employer's expectation with the young person. Remember, this programme is not about finding the very best applicant for the job. It's about providing opportunities for those young people who are likely to fall into long-term unemployment without the help of Kickstart. All the jobs are fully funded by the government, and there's that £1,500 to help us with the setup and costs and skills training. So the young people that we refer to this will not necessarily have all the usual attributes and skills demanded by an employer in the context of a vacancy, and that's why it's fully funded. So it's a different mindset that we need with this, and I think we really have to focus on the potential of the individual, which for all intents and purposes won't be by any stretch of the imagination necessarily the finished article when they start all of this. They may not have the greatest attitude to work, but over the course of the placement and with help and support, we can prepare these young people for the world of work. So I suppose hints and tips for a gateway application from what I've seen. I'm not going to go into financial or fiscal issues here because I'm assuming that you're all very bona fide organisations on the call this afternoon. I think what's really important is to recognise the fact that you need to demonstrate the additionality of these jobs. These jobs, in the main, wouldn't ordinarily be created if it wasn't for Kickstart. The additionality is there because you want to make a difference for the young person. That the company hasn't made redundancies. That the company hasn't got numbers of young people on furlough at the moment, and so there are additional vacancies where there's also been no job losses. But ordinarily too, there wouldn't have been any more jobs created, because if it's usual everyday demand, that's what it should be. It should be recruitment. So this is additional. And you need to be specific with each particular employer. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you need to go into massive detail about that, but you need to really put a statement against every employer that you're supporting through your Kickstart Gateway application. The other thing that you need to do as well in that application is to demonstrate the support that you're giving that young person from an employability point of view. It's all about making sure that young person is in a better place when they finish the Kickstart placement, and they are essentially more employable. Now, if you're an AEB provider, then I'm assuming here that what you're also going to do, you're going to look at how we work with that young person about their skills. And that's great. And if you can articulate that on your gateway bids, whether you're going to do that yourselves or whether you're going to ask or the employer that you're linking with is going to do that, that's for you to agree with your Kickstart application. But a little bit about how you're bringing that person in, what you're going to do with them from an employability point of view, and what you're hoping to achieve. But at the end of the Kickstart placement, if for some of those it might potentially be an apprenticeship, as I said earlier, that's brilliant. So as I said, what I'll do, I'll make sure that you get all the right links to the appropriate parts of gov.uk that'll enable you to make a really good quality gateway application. And your district Kickstart leads, who are the font of a great deal of knowledge now, because they've been involved from the point really that of the inception of Kickstart since July, and so we are learning with this program as we move along. We are expecting quite a number of vacancies on Kickstart over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks. I suppose as we operationalise what we're doing on Kickstart, we're going to start learning a few more lessons. And I hope once we get through that, we'll start to see some of the easements and some of the streamlining of the processes that, as I said earlier, are a little bit clunky at the moment. And I fully accept that. And if you've applied to be a gateway, you'll probably recognise that yourselves. But when we're working with a programme that we are developing as it rolls out, there was no great deal of previous thinking on this. I just think from a personal point of view, it's a great opportunity for young people at a time when COVID hit young people really hard. So I'm more than happy to take questions. But David, before we go there, I suppose, is there anything else that you want to add from your point of view from the work that we've done?
I think it's the points you made there, Richard, is right at the start. It's a brand new program, and there's a lot of development work which has obviously been ongoing. I think if anything, what might be useful is if you could just outline that element of how the young person's journey, because I appreciate you mentioned about the youth hubs, but in terms of that referral process of a young person via the work coach into the vacancy via a gateway, and how you see that operating would be quite useful, I think.
Okay, so as a gateway, you'll be linked with at least 30 employers, at least 30 vacancies, because that's your gateway bid.
Yeah.
I suppose from our point of view, when you achieve gateway status, we would want to make sure that we get our understanding is your understanding of what that employer is looking for. So there's some really useful discussions to have up front as soon as you achieve your gateway status. We'd then like to talk to either you or your linked employers about how that vacancy would be managed. So that would be around the job description for those vacancies, the numbers of people that you'd want to see, or the employer would want to see, and clearly from our point of view, we'd want to keep that as low as possible, ideally to get a one-to-one matched submission to this particular vacancy, and we'd want to make sure as well that we get feedback from all of those employers about what they thought of the applicant, how they felt the applicant could fit in with their organisation. But we will do that as part of vacancy management. I think it's all the referrals to Kickstart need to come through their designated work coach, because we need to make sure what's happening with those young people. There's some of the gateways that have gone live are the focal point for, and they are the route in and out to employers. Some are preferring to go down that route from a sifting criteria point of view, and if you find that easier, if that's something that you want to do, there's absolutely no issue with that. Others are saying you go straight to the employer. I think the important thing though there for me is that we have those discussions up front about what that might look like from one gateway to another, and how you want to work with those employers. So that's fairly new. We're making sure that all the gateways that have gone live over the last 2-3 weeks between Christmas and New Year, that we're having those discussions about the referral process, making sure that we've got quality there in the system. I go back a long time in this department. I go back well even before we used to have cards on the boards in the job centres, and I think what we're trying to do here is to try and reinvent ourselves a little bit, and have some really decent, good old-fashioned job broking that gets that right from the beginning. And so we're doing a quality piece of work for you and your employers, but also managing those expectations. Kickstart won't be for every young person, and I think there's a piece of work that our work coaches need to do up front, because there will be those people, those young people who can help themselves to jobs. This is about making sure that if a customer is completely a massive distance away from the labour market, even Kickstart may not be for them. This is someone who can handle a work placement, but perhaps wouldn't cut the mustard and wouldn't be at the top of the pecking order from an interview. And I think it's that fine balance in terms of a work coach's perception of where that customer sits. And I think with time, I'm sure we'll make a few mistakes as we go through this, but I think that's where ideally we want this to be. We don't want young people signposted to any of your vacancies. If you are a gateway or an employer with all of this, we want a conversation to be had between the work coach and the employer in every particular case. And I know that creates a few issues at the moment, because we haven't got the customer sitting in front of us. When we started to talk about Kickstart and how Kickstart would run from an operations point of view, we started that discussion in September. We thought we were coming out of lockdown then, and our aim was that a referral to Kickstart would be done with the customer sitting in front of a work coach in a job centre. Clearly, we can't do that at the moment. And so what we've said is that that trying to get it right with you as employers, trying to get that right in terms of the referral, being an advocate for the customer as well with the employer is going to be key in addition. So all of those things, David, are the type of quality sort of areas that we're trying to build into the Kickstart process, if that helps.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just looking at the chat, and there's not many questions appearing there. So I can, just looking at time, I can take 2 questions. So if anyone wants to raise their hand to ask a question of Richard, more than happy to take a question now, or forever hold your peace, and we'll move on to the next element of the webinar. And I'll give it another 2, 3. Right, no hands have gone up, Richard. So that's you off the hook there in terms of questions. So that means we've done a very good job in terms of clarifying where. But
I mean, if there are questions beyond it after this, obviously, David and myself talk most days at the moment. So you know, if there are things that you want to raise, or if there's a discussion that you have beyond this about Kickstart, then obviously come through David, and we'll answer that. But I'll get those links out to you, David, and the contact names as well.
Great.
So depending on which district you're operating in, you know who you can go to. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for that input. Great. Okay, so from an AEB and Kickstart approach, so obviously from a combined authority perspective, we've been looking at our policy on this and what our policy line will be going forward. And I don't think my slide's not moved forward, so I'm hoping that everyone's on the WMCA AEB policy context. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's great. So just in terms of the actual context itself, we've been looking at Kickstart, and certainly from what we see is a fantastic opportunity for individuals to move into sustainable employment, and through that, and through the Kickstart opportunities, we see that there's a fantastic opportunity for progression into apprenticeships, given that many of these individuals will be moving into job roles, whether it be a job description, which could potentially be aligned to a potential future apprenticeship opportunity, to secure that individual's employment, be with that employer, or for them to develop the knowledge and skills from that job role, where they can use that and passport that into another potential job role elsewhere. So clear opportunity there in terms of young people, skills development, employment opportunities. And for us, we think that certainly from an AEB perspective, AEB can provide additionality, and it can provide additionality in addition to the wraparound support, which is being made available via DWP based on the £1,500, because in many cases we'll know that there is an actual extra day in that a young person potentially will be working 25 hours a week. That would lead them to potentially an extra day in terms of time where that individual could be undertaking maths and English, or a vocationally specific level 2 or level 3 qualification. So from a combined authority perspective, we've already issued our policy update that the combined authority is happy for its employer facing provision, so for lot 2 and lot 4 providers, and also its grant providers, to deliver English and maths and occupational trainings at level 2 and level 3 in relation to their delivery plans. So that's the policy context. So certainly from your perspective, that gives you that opportunity to start to think about how you could potentially develop your gateway, or at least develop a offer to a gateway or an offer to a large employer with AEB, which will provide that level of progression. Many of you have been on my, moving on, many of you have been on my webinar on the 17th of November, which I did in partnership with Richard, where I talked about what good looks like. And you'll be familiar with this slide in terms of how we've broken it down into the four component parts. I won't go through this in detail, but at stage 3, we see that this is where AEB fits, and where a potential AEB offering could be provided to a young person while they're on their Kickstart program. And the design of that, it would be really key. But how we see it operating, if let's move on to the next slide, is that it provides the opportunity. Are we moving on? Thank you. Yeah. It provides the opportunity by bringing in AEB, certainly to enable that individual to develop skills and for further skills development. And it also supports that other element which I mentioned about in-work progression. Right at the start, when I gave my input, I mentioned that the West Midlands is struggling at the moment in terms of fragile low wages and fragile employment. A lot of that is down to individuals not getting the levels of skills training they need to provide in work progression. So via Kickstart and via using AEB, potentially we can set the ground and put the groundwork in providing some occupational skills training, which will provide and support that in work progression into employment, potentially via an apprenticeship. And as I mentioned previously, certainly by providing a vocational training and with the visibility to apprenticeship being quite clear in many of these job roles, there's a real clear opportunity for an individual to progress into an apprenticeship with that employer. And from a provider perspective, if you're building up an offer and you're thinking about how Gateway can operate and how you'd operate as a Gateway provider, thinking about how your AEB wraparound support could be available on top of the wraparound support, but the AEB in additionality to that, and then progression into apprenticeships where there'll be a range of incentives for the employer, it starts to become quite an attractive proposition for both an employer and both you as a provider in providing that pathway for the young person. So a real key opportunity there for AEB providers and how they line up their business model and their operation to how and make the most of Kickstart to provide that progression for that young person. And it doesn't need to be just apprenticeships. It could be further in work progression once the individual moves into employment through your other Lot 2 or Lot 4, or if you're a grant provider, your delivery plan where you can focus on further Level 3 type opportunities. So big opportunity there. I think the other element, the final element, is alluding to what Richard mentioned about sector coverage, and what we'd like to see through bringing AEB to the fore and for you as an AEB providers is providing that access to wider sectors and that wider sector support in STEM and digital. So for instance, we talk about engineering and engineering provision, and how certainly for Kickstart, how an engineering vocational qualifications could be wrapped around a Kickstart offering alongside digital, for instance, and other types of programs. That provides certainly an attractive proposition for an employer, where it might be the case, well, we can't commit to recruiting apprentices at this moment in time, given where we're at, given lockdown, but potentially Kickstart provides us that opportunity and gives us an opportunity for engaging with somebody who's a little bit further away from the labour market, where you can provide that opportunity via Kickstart, supported through AEB, to enable that individual to move into a future apprenticeship through a more, through across all sectors. So provides that kind of opportunity really to provide that, certainly from an employer perspective, a more attractive proposition that this isn't just about a so can see in terms of a 6-month program for a young person. This is about a sustainable opportunity for a young person to move through the gears. So to move through Kickstart, supported through AEB, into an apprenticeship opportunity. So, clear opportunity there for AEB. Moving on. So, what it is we want to establish. So, first and foremost, we're encouraging all of our AEB providers to think seriously about being a gateway, and be it your independent training provider, be it your a college. Certainly, all of our local authorities are now either accepted and recognised as a gateway, or are in the process of being accepted as a gateway. So we know, for instance, so we'll have seven of our local authorities, all 7 local authorities will have a gateway offer in each of their districts, but we will need more capacity, and we'll need good quality capacity, certainly to deliver the things I've been talking about here in terms of providing that progression into apprenticeship, providing that in-work progression, so that these young people aren't just moving into fragile, low-paid jobs at the end of Kickstart, to moving into sustainable employment, into a better paid job. So really key there, and I think that AEB providers can play a real key role in that. I think secondly, certainly what we want to establish is ensure that we've got sufficient breadth and coverage across the geographies and the sectors. And what we want to be able to create is an AEB offer for Kickstart. So we want to provide that offer so that both an employer and a young person knows, and gateways, if other gateway organisations who don't have access to AEB, where certainly chambers I know are working with certain colleges, but certainly I want to be able to create that offer. So we've got a directory of provision so that our employers and young people and other gateways can access it via our provider base, be it you a college, a local authority, or an independent training provider. So a lot of work there, but I think real value added piece which we can provide via AEB to support Kickstart going forward. I'm now going to hand over to Glenn, who's going to give an input into where Coventry are at in terms of their journey. So Glenn, over to you.
Thanks, David. Afternoon, everyone. Just brief for me, so I'll just talk about where we're at in terms of Kickstart in Coventry, and particularly have a discussion around what we're considering doing with our adult education budget and the conversations we've had around that. So just to start off with, just to give an overview of our engagements and how many Kickstart vacancies we've got. You can see a big initial interest here on this table, particularly September, October. Obviously, the scheme was launched in September, and we were inundated really with inquiries from businesses without particularly having to do lots of marketing. But I think with DWP listing on the Government Gateway website for people to contact their local authority as one of the kind of main contact points. And once we were set up as a gateway, we got a lot of initial inquiries. You can see that the business number is much lower than the potential vacancies. That's because several of the businesses we were dealing with were talking about between sort of 10 and 20 vacancies. Others had ones or twos. But it's why you've got 37 businesses, but potentially 128 vacancies, which in the end worked out at 109 because not all of them were suitable once we'd discussed with the business and made sure they understood Kickstart. And as David said, those conversations that we've had with businesses weren't just around just discussing Kickstart. It's really important when we talk to businesses that are interested that we talk about all of the different opportunities in terms of traineeships, apprenticeships, vacancies, just generally, and the differences between them and what is and isn't suitable for Kickstart. Because I think some employers had a bit of a misconception at first about how Kickstart could work. And I think what we were really careful to do from the start, I think we picked up quite early on that it wasn't necessarily going to be a quick process with the size of the scheme and the way that DWP would have to grow as an organisation to respond to that. And I know there's had to be a lot of recruitment into Kickstart specific roles and the setting up of a whole new team. So we tried to manage business expectations at the start and say to them, we don't expect young people to start immediately. It could take several months for the process to be complete. I know the process is now a lot quicker, but if we go back to September, it's not been a fast process. But I think that's also about helping businesses understand what Kickstart's for as well, because if they have immediate vacancies to fill and they needed people straight away, really that isn't suitable for Kickstart. That's a vacancy that they should be promoting in the usual way and filling as they would fill a vacancy. Kickstart is more about creating additional opportunities for young people to come into a business, add value to that business, but obviously give the young people an opportunity to gain some valuable work experience and be paid for their time and hopefully progress. So it's also helping businesses to understand that really it's not about filling vacancies. If we can go to the next slide, just gives a bit more detail as to where we're at the moment. So we submitted 5 applications altogether, so that covers 150 vacancies. We've got a couple nearly complete, which should take us to I think about 210 when we get applications 6 and 7 in. Obviously, each time we're waiting to build up a minimum of 30 vacancies spread across different employers before we put another application in. We've now thankfully got to a stage where we've had some vacancies approved, so we've got 66 vacancies approved. We're now just working with those businesses to get the full job adverts and get all of the details through, and then get them onto the DWP portal so that we can start directing young people that we're working with in Coventry, obviously working closely with DWP to get them through the system and to those employers. There's obviously been a bit of complication with that because since those vacancies have been approved, we went fairly quickly. Well, at the time we were going into tier 4, and now we've gone into a national lockdown. So some of those vacancies, I think, unfortunately, are going to have to be postponed. If you look at the sectors in the table on the right-hand side, you'll see there's some, quite a few sales and retail ones, which won't be able to happen at the moment. But the majority of them should be fine. We know the business admin ones, we've had responses from all those employers and they're moving ahead. The digital marketing's moving ahead. I think the finance ones, the labouring ones, I think might be delayed. So there's a few of others that may be delayed. The biggest concern is obviously those sales and retail ones, which are unfortunately going to be a little bit postponed. What we've been doing in the interim in terms of getting young people ready for these vacancies in Coventry. So through the Coventry Job Shop, we've been holding weekly sessions focusing on different sectors, picking up some of the larger sectors here to start with, just to get the young people aware of the vacancies that are there and do some basic kind of preparation around the kind of things that we have coming in. We've started to look at our adult education budget in terms of maths and English as something that could very much start now. And if we look at this vacancy breakdown as well, we can see there's a lot of business admin in there, the digital marketing ones, the finance ones, particularly where maths and English skills are really important, and we've engaged our employers on that. And that's going to, add a lot of value to those placements. But it's very much something where we're looking at, while the young people are waiting for these Kickstart vacancies to start, can they start working on their maths and English now? If that is a barrier for them, if their maths and English levels are too low to progress in these roles. But then very much it's not when they start the Kickstart placement, it's about continuing that. So we'd be looking at working closely with those employers because the majority of these are following the Kickstart pattern of 25 hours a week. So there's plenty of time and space in the week, similar to an apprenticeship, where those young people can be working on their maths and English. So if we go to the next slide, you can see we've started to market maths and English courses at various levels. That's really case by case basis, looking at the level that the young person is currently at. But it's just about removing those barriers and also helping progression. So we can say to those employers, if they are interested in a young person and they interview well, but the maths or English was a barrier, at least if they've already started a course or they're about to start a course, that barrier can be removed. And then also at the end of the 6 months, there's a much better chance of progression if they've moved on with their maths and English. That employer's more likely to take them on, or they're more likely to get a job with another employer. But what we've looked at as well, which is I think just as exciting, is looking at, and if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what we started considering. So we've looked at some of the individual job roles, and we've looked at what adult education courses are Coventry Adult Education currently provide that fit into these. And I've got my colleagues Elaine and Ruth on the call, who've worked hard on this for me to come back with a list of potential courses. So we're not at the moment saying this is definitely what we're going to do, but these are potential courses that we're now discussing with the businesses involved to say, you know, for example, for this account administrator one, we can tie in level 2 in accounting and business. We can tie in Sage, computerized payroll, customer service if relevant. And you can kind of see we've been doing that for the different job roles. I've just picked out a few here because otherwise it'd be too much to show you. But for our more customer service roles, we've obviously looked at customer service level 2 courses, and we've got other roles where we're tying in different sector specific courses. The main focus has been more on the admin and finance roles at the moment, but there's different bits and pieces we can do. And again, that will really add value to these placements, both for the young person and the employer. So the employer's getting someone that is going to be trained as they're working on the job. And obviously that course can be flexed around their working hours. But the young person's gaining skills and a qualification, which I think is going to make them much more employable at the end of their 6 months. To come out with a level 2 qualification or a level 3, rather than coming out just with the 6 months paid work experience, which, you know, is going to make a big difference, is really useful. But adding that qualification on top, I think, just adds a lot of additional value. So that's just a very brief run through of where we're at with Coventry at the moment and what we're planning to use our adult education budget for. This is all through Coventry Adult Education. We haven't discussed with other providers yet, but we've looked internally to start with.
Right, thank you for that. That's really comprehensive, and thanks for you know, obviously in terms of your journey, and actually that sector breakdown was really helpful to see where the vacancies are actually landing, and obviously the final piece of work which yourself and your colleagues have been on with in terms of mapping your vocational offering potentially to those vacancies. That's great. It's great to see, and hopefully proof will be in the pudding when the vacancies finally go live and start matching in. But I appreciate it's been a long journey. A lot of hard work has gone into that. So thank you. I'm going to move us on now to Michelle at Pathway Group. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So we can move on to the first slide. So obviously, sorry, I am Michelle, Kickstart and Employability Manager for Pathway Group. So Pathway Group are a national training provider. We have been at the forefront of supporting individuals throughout their journey into and during employment, delivering qualifications tailored to job outcomes and obviously linked to employers. So we exist to encourage and advance employment opportunities by matching the needs of the business, the individuals and the communities. So we are supporting employers through the change in the landscape of apprenticeship delivery and what else we can do. We understand the importance of developing and maintaining relationships that last. So Kickstart has been a fantastic opportunity to build new relationships with new employers. We are an ESFA contract holder for apprenticeships, traineeships. We've got adult education budget contracts, advanced learner loans, in addition to being an Ofsted good provider. And obviously we are an approved gateway provider. If we could move on. So we have taken a 5-stage approach to Kickstart. So I know that writing's probably coming up quite small. I think it's to do with the font on the screen. So basically our first stage is to engage. So we have spent since September through digital marketing methods, we have contacted all of our existing clients, engaging with new businesses to identify Kickstart opportunities and providing advice and guidance on eligibility and processes. And we've done that through a number of weekly webinars. We've been on radio shows to see how we can support businesses within the local communities. Stage 2 would obviously be the registration and submission. So this is where we've got an automated application process. So once we've had the initial advice and guidance, we've talked about the job opportunities that they can create. They would then submit. We would carry out our own desktop due diligence checks beforehand to ensure we are happy with the vacancies. And obviously we would then submit to the Kickstart approval board. So once those approvals have come through, we then get onto the onboarding stage. And this is where we work really well with each employer to design a tailored package to support both the business and the individual, and where we can align any other funding streams. So we have access to skill support for the workforce funding, as well as obviously our AEB funding as well. So we would create individual learning plans and action plans to identify any skill gaps for the individual, where they see their role becoming, and where obviously we could then start talking about opportunities following from the Kickstart placement. We move on to stage 4, which is our delivery mode. So again, we've got a blended learning using a range of interventions to ensure a high impacting and dynamic experience for each Kickstarter. And then prior to the Kickstart placement finishing, we would then work again with the individuals and the employers to identify those progression opportunities into job outcomes, including apprenticeships being the first and foremost. So again, we've built that relationship up now. We've also can open it up to their other staff, but more so about getting this progression opportunity for each employer, each vacancy for the Kickstarters. So that is our kind of 5-stage approach to Kickstart. If we could move on to the next stage. Go to the next slide. Digitalization. So back in September, Pathway Group appointed me as the Kickstart and Employability Manager, champion our services and scheme to offer existing Pathway Group clients and new businesses via several digital channels, supporting businesses across England, Scotland and Wales, and aligning with further support offerings, so any other offerings of funding we have. We have been operating weekly webinar sessions and we've had over 600 employers attend these, offering opportunity for regular question and answer sessions, because I believe there were a lot of myths around Kickstart and people didn't think they were eligible if they hadn't got 30 vacancies or more. And then since October, we've established a live chat support service as well, which has surveyed over 200 communications relating to the Kickstart scheme. So there is many questions out there that employers still need answering, I believe. So we've tried to play an active part in supporting those employers. We also, if we can move on to the next slide, we again trying to build these relationships up with these employers. We are leaving those employers in the driver's seat. So when it comes to the Kickstart and the support and the recruitment, we are trying, as I said, to give as much support as possible to the employers to allow them to make the decisions on how much support they put into the Kickstart scheme. So on the left, obviously, is what the gateway will receive. So we all know we get £300 per placement. So that is totally free for the employer. There is no cost attached. We then try to actively encourage the employers to conduct all their own recruitment, all their screening, all their skills scanning, etc. So we have put a package to them so we can help them and support them through that. But we've said we would keep £1,000 of that £1,500 if that was the case. And that purely is to try and encourage them to try and do that themselves. But we have also put an employability package together, which we are saying would be £500. And again, this is optional, but we're trying to encourage them to use our level of expertise on this employability support. So we would provide employability support directly to the young people throughout the scheme and afterwards. They would have dedicated one-to-one support with sector-specific training courses and support for the Kickstart employees. Could move on to the next slide. So part of our recruitment package, as I said, is if we really need to get involved and help them with their recruitment, we know obviously with limited staff available, they may struggle. So we would help out with all the stuff like the screening, arranging interviews for them, conducting any DBS checks, and help preparing any contracts of employment they may need. So again, we are trying to encourage all employers to take the option that they deal with all their recruitment themselves, but we are there for support if they need. We'll move on to the next slide, which is for the employability package. So again, we would create action plans, we would mentor and support throughout, we conduct progress reviews, CV writing, job searching, goal setting, skill logs, interview techniques and training, and also managing the placement progression and the next steps for each Kickstarter too. So as you will see, we've always said it is there as an option, and it is an option, so we can leave them in the driver's seat. If we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, I'm rushing through this a little bit because I thought I've got quite a few slides in comparison to Glenn, so I do apologise.
You're okay, Michelle. You're okay. Keep going.
So we have got a vast amount of additional accredited courses we can put through the Kickstart scheme, as well as obviously the AEB and the skill support for the workforce. But I've just put a few on here now so you can see the range. It can be from anything from care to warehousing to nutrition to first aid. So we've got a vast amount of courses that we can put added value to these young people. So they've got extra qualifications to add to their CV as well. If we could just move on, because that is just literally just a snapshot of some of the courses. Putting the employers in the driver's seat, our recruitment and employability services are optional. We're here to give as much advice or as little support, as much or as little support that is required to administer the scheme. Our advice is to the employers is to don't try and do everything yourselves. Consider obviously the providers for pastoral care. But regardless of the level of service they pick, Pathway Group will support them through the whole process and afterwards. And we will assist where possible with identifying any other support needs for any other staff members they have. So again, that can include anything for our skill support for the workforce, learner loans, AEB. So we are very lucky. We're in a position we have got multiple funding streams we can support these employers with, as well as Kickstart. If we can move on. Okay, so to the nitty-gritty of our data at the moment, you will see that overall the amount of employers that have registered with Pathway Group is 787 employers, and that equates to 3,411 vacancies that they have requested. So those have come through our initial registration page. 705 of those employers have actually been submitted for approval. And that equates to 2,195 vacancies overall that have been submitted. 24 employers, we are still awaiting further information. So once we've carried out our own due diligence, we still need some further information to support that application. So we're waiting for 24 employers. And unfortunately, we did reject 58 employers through our internal checks. Again, that may be for fiscal competence, it may be on size and structure of the organisation or the support. However, with the news, obviously, of the new spotlight checks coming into place, with the allowing a more substantial flow of employers going to accept rather than reject, we would be looking now to probably resubmit some of those rejections also. So that's very positive. So the numbers are very high. We are trying to manage the expectations of nearly 800 employers. But if I could move on now to the not so good news as such. Since September, we have been constantly engaging and onboarding new businesses to the Kickstart scheme. So again, those weekly webinars have been fantastic. In December, we were all jumping for joy. We received a first notification of approvals coming through. However, before we could all get too excited, there were a lot of discrepancies on the data. So we had employers that wasn't part of our applications, we had missing employers, etc. So we have had to go back to the Kickstart approval board on this. And obviously we were waiting for further news before Christmas on all the other applications we had submitted also. Unfortunately, we were chasing the Kickstart approval board in January, and basically we've been notified that some of our data has been lost and that we have had to resubmit all applications. So it's been really, really positive to see the amount of employers that really want to get involved in Kickstart and how we can support them, and obviously with their choices of offerings. But it's the lack of communication we're getting from the Kickstart approval board at the moment that is making it really difficult to manage the expectations of these 800 employers, especially when some have been on since September. So it would be really good to try and get some response back very soon to the applications that we have had to resubmit. And I think that is me done. I think the next slide is just me there with my contact details. As I said, we're happy to work with other providers where we can. But yeah, thank you very much.
Michelle, thank you for that. And that's really thorough. And thank you for your openness and transparency as well in terms of your journey from a pathway perspective. And you shared a lot of content there, for AEB providers to take on, and that just demonstrates, the power of collaboration amongst the provider base, which is great to see. So thank you very much for that. I think just one question for me is just on the basis of you've got a lot of vacancies there, and a lot in terms of approval. In terms of what we call COVID resilience, do you believe, how resilient were those vacancies? Do you believe that some of them will be probably maybe dropping off now, or are they commitments over the life cycle of Kickstart? So
Possibly, but again, when you were talking about sectors, I think Richard mentioned earlier about looking at the sectors. We are very heavily involved in the care sector, in the cleaning sector, in the warehousing sector. So I mean, we offer a range of courses and support we can do, but our biggest sectors are possibly those that are still working, are still there. Obviously, we have got quite a few that are sales and marketing driven, and it would have been really good if I could have copied the sector slide really and put some information into that. But we have got a really wide range now. Some of them will be affected, but again, with the delay that we've had, David, it's kind of initially when we were looking at the initial lockdown in November, we could then identify how many this would possibly affect. We were hoping to obviously get those answers and sorted, but there will be a few. I'll have to go back now and check with the latest lockdown on those nearly 800 employers. But a lot of them are the sectors that are kind of still going, that are pushing through. And I said we've targeted our existing employers, and where we know, as I said, there will be that drive in recruitment.
Great, thank you. And I think the other thing as well is, as Richard said in his input, is that we're certainly from a West Midlands Combined Authority and DWP perspective, we're here to sort of support, and obviously from a district manager's perspective at DWP, I know that Richard would welcome the opportunity for those district managers to be looking at those vacancies, or at least trying to support you in terms of those applications. So because we want to, Richard, I appreciate you just come online there. So there's a lot of it looks like there's a significant volume of vacancies there, and we want to get those live.
They're not all West Midlands, Richard. Sure. Sorry, they're not all. They are nationwide, mate. And I believe, obviously, being on the forum with Nick, that I think the initial batch of applications together hasn't helped the situation. So. Yeah. So hopefully we can kind of get some answers out soon, because I said I'm getting some very frustrated.
Yeah. I think from a West Midlands point of view, Michelle, it'd be really good to touch base and think about where your West Midlands sort of employer portfolio sits, because I could hook you up with my district leads on that one to support you, help you fill the jobs. Yeah.
So if I send you some details, Richard, on possibly all of our employers, how many we've got within the West Midlands, the sectors.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. My email's address on there, because I think Darren wanted to get in touch with me as well, so that's fine. Thanks, Michelle.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, and
thanks, David.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. So in terms of next steps now, I think we're ahead of time, actually. Great. So we might all be able to get a cup of coffee before 4:30, because no doubt everyone's got other appointments in the diaries. But in terms of next steps, what we're doing from a combined authority perspective is we are going to put together a bit of a template, and just ask our AEB providers to complete it. It's up to you. Do you want to be part of this in terms of, do you want to provide a Kickstart offer or not? So it's not mandatory that that you provide a Kickstart offer, because in some certain cases you might not be able to do that. It might not be feasible for you. But I would encourage all of our AEB providers to come back with a response in terms of what potentially your offer would be if you were to offer a wraparound service for Kickstart via AEB, in terms of your provision type, accessibility, how it's accessed, delivery models, locations, and things such as that. So hopefully we'll be able to issue that next week. And then secondary to that, if you have got any issues or any questions, shall I say, really, more questions, please do route them via your compliance officers, and we'll try and deal with those as they come in. So finally for me, I would now just like to thank all guest speakers. So Richard from DUP, thank you very much. Glenn from Coventry, local authority, thank you. And Michelle finally from Pathway, thank you very much for your contributions. Appreciate you've had to take time out to develop your slide decks and obviously to present to us. So we very much appreciate it. Spirit of collaboration is great. It's great to see that in the West Midlands. But thank you all, and no doubt we'll be having follow-up webinars again on Kickstart. I know that Richard likes these because we've done the second one we've done now. So hopefully we'll be repeating this again in a not too distant future, so we can continue the conversation and the development.
If there are any more questions, obviously keep putting them in there, and I'm here for the next couple of hours anyway, so I should be able to answer them. I'll come back to you, Graham, on your question there.
Great.
Which actually that'd be useful answering that one for everybody on the call today. Graham's question is around a placement. Is there a time limit? No, and I think we absolutely expect that with the current situation we have with the lockdown, that a good number of those vacancies that perhaps were going to be brought forward now aren't going to happen because of the stay-at-home message of this lockdown. So placements can start any time between now and the end of December. So Graham, I hope that answers your question and supports everybody else's potential question there as well.
Thanks, Richard. Secondly to that, I actually can't see the chat function. It's not coming up. So there's been lots of questions. Apologies if it's been, I've not answered any, it's just because I can't actually see them. So what I'll do is at the end of this call with Jess, I'll just go through them and then feed back to you in terms of when we send out the webinar slide deck. We'll make sure all the questions are answered if it's from a combined authority perspective. So apologies about that, and apologies if you felt that I've been ignoring you. I haven't, can't see the questions. So
I think I've got most of them, David.
Oh, Richard, thank you. Really appreciate it. Got me out of jail. Thank you all. Listen, I'll leave you all to it with 15 minutes to spare. So enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.